want to start the sermon with a tribute to Dr. Gordon Harris, my Old Testament professor, and he took us through Genesis, and he had talked about necklaces like this. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these, Mizpah. It's got the nice little hearts, the Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent from one another. And then you see how the one chain is like the bigger, thicker chain, and then the thinner chain, so it's like the his and hers, and you could have these. And he just said, that is such garbage. Because people that wear these have no idea the context of this saying. This is not a romantic saying. This is a saying between two very broken parties who never want to see each other again. And they want to make sure God's got his eyes on them while they're away. So that's a tribute to him. But you'll know the context after this story. And it does start with a love story. So if you're more of a love story kind of person, good. We're gonna get into that. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 29. We're going through a lot of scripture today, so we're going to work through it. But there's just so much in these stories. Jacob, last week, he met God, and God told him, I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to bless you. I'm going to see you through. And so he's conditionally committed to this God being with him, and he's on his way. And in chapter 29, he sees that God is with him. God's doing some work already. So he continues on the journey. He comes to this well in the open country, which would be welcome if you're traveling through the wilderness anyway. Like, hey, there's water. You might live still. And then he sees 3 flocks of sheep. So it's not just water, it's civilization. Like, this is what he knows. He's a herdsman. And these shepherds are there. They're gathering at the local water hole, literally. And so he goes over there, and he talks with these shepherds and just has this conversation, my brothers, where are you from? We're from Haran. Like, oh, that's exactly where he's trying to go. That's good. And he's like, do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson? He's trying to find his uncle. And yes, we know him. They answered, oh, that's great. They know my uncle. So he's like homing in on this journey. There's no Google Maps for him on this 550-mile route that he's been on. And so then Jacob asked, is he well? Which is probably good cultural thing to ask. They say, yes, he is. And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. And it's like, oh, like one of his daughters, that's what I'm after, That's what I came 550 miles to, is to find one of these daughters. So here she is coming this way just now. This is working out really well for Jacob, if you're thinking him. And so then he starts talking sheep, which is kind of interesting. But he says, look, the sun's still high in the sky. Like, you guys shouldn't have these flocks sitting around. They should be out grazing. So what are you doing here? Which makes me think, like, Jacob didn't have amazing people skills, because here he is, the new guy with these guys, and he's telling them how they should be shepherding their sheep. And they tell him, well, this is the deal. This watering hole, like, the cover for it is a big rock. And this rock is it's a 2-person lift rock, right? This is above 60 pounds. OSHA has decreed, like, this rock doesn't get lifted by one person. So these guys have kind of figured that out over time. Yeah, when people try to lift this rock by themselves, they get hurt. So we work together on this rock, and to make sure no shepherd gets left behind, right? Then they wait for everybody to get there, and then they move the rock. And Jacob, nope, he's not having that. He's a guy that can move a 2-person rock by himself. So he goes out there and he moves the rock, and then he takes care of Rachel's sheep. He waters her sheep, and so she could see that, hey, I'm a guy that can move, a 2-person rock by myself, and I'm a guy that could take care of sheep. And then he runs over to Rachel because he's like met his objective, and he's just overjoyed, 550 miles, like this is it. And he kisses her. Now, this kiss probably wasn't a kiss on the lips, right? This is a greeting kiss. Still questionable about the propriety of even a greeting kiss with somebody that, a woman that you haven't met out in public, but she is his family, she is his cousin, she will be his wife, but okay, things are a little different culturally. I was at the basketball game when the AJBSR boys broke the losing streak that has kind of plagued them for a couple of years, and it was just like we'd won the state tournament. And Ryan Pickering, just after it was like they won, he ran and he jumped up on David Cope, the assistant coach, and kissed him on the cheek. And I saw David's response was kind of like, not sure like that was what was appropriate. So that's kind of how I envisioned this kiss going over, and Jacob's playing the part of Ryan, and Rachel playing the part of David Cope, like, huh? But she runs and tells her dad all about this guy, this family member that's come and he took care of the sheep. And so dad comes, Laban comes, and he greets him with a kiss and embraces him and brings him to the home and says to him, "You are my own flesh and blood," which you might think in most contexts would be good news, but it's a curse if you're this guy's flesh and blood, because he is jerk, and he plays his role well. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing?" People that are jerks like this, like the way they word things is backwards. They make it look like they're the ones being generous when they're taking. And so like, just because you're a relative, should you work for nothing? Like the assumption is you're going to have to work for me because you're a relative. And you probably should work for nothing, but I should be generous. I should give you more than nothing to work. So he offers to do him something. "Tell me, what should your wages be?" He's kind of thinking like you're at servant level. And this is Jacob's opportunity. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. We don't know for sure what that means, but contextually is not a positive. So Leah probably wishes she had different eyes than the one she has. But Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel, and so he makes this proposal. "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Not the most romantic proposal, but it worked. Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man." Not the most loving father. So, yep, this is the deal. Stay with me. And Jacob serves 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Like, that is almost like, that's a Hallmark movie moment there. That like 7 years and enjoy it because it's the end of the Hallmark series because it changes quickly. So the 7 years are up, and of course Laban doesn't remember without a reminder. He's the kind of guy that just kind of lets the rent go unpaid. And so Jacob comes to him and is like, "Hey, 7 years are up. I really want to get married, and I want to be with my wife. So let's get this show on the road." And so Laban's like, okay. He gathers the party, gets all the relatives together. They have, the party, the drinking, the kind of things that would go with like this. And then at nighttime, when Jacob goes into the tent, Laban brings the older daughter, Leah, not Rachel, who he worked for 7 years. And he gives Leah to him. And under the influence and in the darkness, he is not aware that the person that he's with all night is not the wife he thought. And it's almost humorous, if it wasn't so tragic, the way verse 25 reads, "When morning came, there was Leah." Made a little PowerPoint for you guys to track this relationships in this chapter because they get pretty crazy. So Jacob has this dream of Jacob and Rachel, and he thought he was living the dream, but he woke up to reality that it's Jacob and Leah, and that sets him off. I don't know if you've ever had something that just like you knew was so wrong, like your lip is just quivering, but this is kind of one of those lip quivering wrongs. Like he's out of that tent, and he's in Laban's face. He's like, "What have you done to me? Didn't I serve you 7 years for Rachel? And now you gave me Leah?" And I think Laban's like, think fast. And he's like, "Well, that's not the culture here. Like, we don't marry the younger ones before the older ones," like as if you couldn't have told him this beforehand. Like this was clearly deception on his part. And we've been talking about the grace of God to work through broken families. And I love the grace of God working through broken families, but you might get the mistaken impression that God isn't also dealing with the sin in these broken families. And God is able to bless and deal with sin. And so what happens here, this grave injustice that happens to Jacob, is actually very fitting justice. Like, who is the one who deceived a father that had waited a lifetime to pass on a blessing to his favorite son, and who swapped siblings on him, and then, lied to him 3 times to his face and said, no, this is Esau, this is Esau, this is Esau. And so now he sees what it's like when your senses are diminished and someone just plays the game on you and swaps siblings for something that's hugely important to you. It's like, how does it feel? And you just need to know, like, God works those things out. In the culture that you're in, people will talk about karma, and that's Hindu, Buddhist, language. The biblical language for the principle that they're observing is that you reap what you sow. And the Apostle Paul to churches, to Christians, like, these are believers, they're covered in the grace. He says, do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. You reap what you sow. And so that's just something that we should be aware of, that God being with us in Jesus Christ does not mean that we're not going to pay a penalty, that we're not going to suffer for doing wrong. And that Jacob is suffering, there's no doubt about it. And Laban, I think probably to save his skin a little bit and to also get another 7 years, he says, here's the deal though. Just wait till this week's over. Just calm down. Like, it's not that big a deal. I just swapped your wife. It's not like... And what we'll do is, like, you go through this wedding week. Let's keep propriety. And then I'll give you Rachel. You can have her. And you can give me another 7 years. Like, Laban doesn't care about his daughters. He doesn't care about his son-in-law. He cares about his business. It's all about growing the flocks to him. And so the deal is done. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel, and Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel and her attendant, and Jacob made love to Rachel, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. Like, this is not good. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. So this is a very broken family. There are things that cause people problems when they're reading through the Bible, and this is one of those things that causes people problems. They're like, wow, what's the deal with this? Like, 2 wives, that's not good. And it isn't good. If you read back earlier, when Isaac sent him away, he didn't say, go get wives in Padan Aram. He said, go get a wife. Like, get one of the daughters of Laban. Like, that's the plan that you're supposed to go with. But Laban has messed this up. Jacob has gone along with the mess up, and so he's done this. And this is bad practice. And the Bible does have people in polygamous marriages, and it's always bad when it happens. God allows for these things, but he doesn't prescribe them. In Genesis, he said, hey, one man, one woman, cleave. And when Jesus reiterates, he says one man, one woman, and that's what we practice. In the United States, we've moved to 1 out of 5 people thinking this is okay. And that's a huge shift from where we used to be, which is not surprising because culturally we're moving a lot. But this is not okay. And in fact, this is not just bad practice. People talk about best practices. This is worst practice. But when the Bible does prescribe in the law, like how things go, it's like, do not take a sister as a rival wife while the woman is still alive. Like, that is terrible for everybody. This is so painful. And it's like, that's what we have going on. This is a worst practice family. And we see why you don't do that as this goes on. So, reap what you sow. That's one thing we know. But God's still able to bless us in our brokenness. Like, we become aware of our brokenness when we reap what we sow, but God still blesses. And you see how broken this family is, and God's still going to bless them. When the Lord saw Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. So God has pity on Leah, the unloved wife. Leah became pregnant, gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, it is because the Lord has been my misery. Surely my husband will love me. Notice who does the naming. Leah does the naming. And another thing that's interesting in this account is Leah uses Yahweh, this holy name of God, the all caps Lord, in her names. Like, Rachel's never going to use that. So the author's saying something about the two this way, kind of which one's on the path. And it's Leah's sons that are going to lead to Jesus, not Rachel's. But again, so she conceived again when she gave birth to a son. Because the Lord heard that I have not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Simeon. So we have Reuben and Simeon. Again, she conceived and she gave birth to a son. She said, now at last my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. So he was named Levi. And it's like, no, he's not. He's not going to get attached to you. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, forget my husband. No, she said, this time I will praise the Lord. I love that. It's like, oh, this is praise the Lord. This is the man by who Jesus will come. So she named him Judah. Then she stopped having children. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. Surprise. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Like, this is infertility causing tension in a marriage, and this is not unusual. And Jacob does not respond well either. Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children? He basically says, you're cursed, woman. And that probably does not move her towards compassion. And so you've got this hugely tense situation. And so she moves to a desperate measure. Then she said, here is Bilhah, my servant, sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her. And before you condemn this, you got to realize like the tension of this. And people are doing different things in our culture to be able to have children. They can't have children because it's so hard for them. And we saw that highlighted this week when the Alabama Supreme Court, ruled that a fertilized embryo is a person. It's like, that is something we should celebrate, really, as biblical. Like, yes, that is true. That's what we've been trying to get our country to realize. And they acknowledge that, but it sent this ripple effect of unintended consequences that now, these IVF clinics, they're shutting down the process because of the liability. And something's got to be done about that, but it's hurting lots of people because they're desperate for children. Like, they want to have children. And so we can see Rachel wants to have children. There's no IVF clinic. And so she takes kind of the old-fashioned route of like, okay, we're going to have a surrogate mom in my servant. She's going to build the family for me. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me, has listened to my plea, and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan. So who named him? Not Bilhah. Like, it's tough to be Rachel or Leah, but it's really painful to be Bilhah because you get given away to be a wife who doesn't even get to name children. You have to bear children that aren't even your own. There's a lot of brokenness to go around. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. Like, you just get the feeling of the dynamics. Like, Naphtali! Like, I've won! Ha! This is on you. Like, this is sick. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, what good fortune! So she named him Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, how happy I am! The women will call me happy. It's like, probably not. So she named him Asher. And then we just get a day in the life of this very broken family. Like, here's an episode. During wheat harvest, Reuben, the oldest, is now old enough to go out and walking around. He went out and he found some mandrake plants. And these plants were kind of assumed to have some maybe fertility properties, aphrodisiac properties. Like, there was a lot of ideas. They're actually poisonous. So, like, don't use these unless you're pretty careful. But he gets them, gives them to his mom, and then Rachel, who's desperate for children still, says, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. And Leah says, no, isn't it enough you took my husband? Like, now you want my son's mandrakes? And she's like, okay, this is the deal. He can sleep with you tonight if you give me the mandrakes. Okay, it's a deal. So Rachel gets the mandrakes, Leah gets the man, and she goes out and meets him. Like, the desperation of this, the humiliation of this. She's like, hey, you got to sleep with me, I bought you. And he comes and sleeps with her. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband. It's like, I don't think he did. I think we attribute things to God. We're going to see that later on in this passage, but God did take care of her. Issachar is the name. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him six sons. She named him Zebulun. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. And then finally, Rachel is able to have children. God listened to her, remembered her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son, which will happen, but not in this story. So, why spend all this time and give you this graph? Because this is one of the most broken families that you'll ever see. Like, this is not a Hallmark movie. This is a Jerry Springer Show episode, right? I mean, it's just like, these are really sick people, stuck in sick relationships, and this is the family that God says, yeah, that's the people we're going to use to build a nation that's going to bless the whole earth. Like, these are the tribal leaders. And it's super important for you to not hide your brokenness, to not pretend you're not broken, because God works through broken people. And it's almost a sickness that's come on the church. It was in Jesus' age, but it's here too, that we kind of think like you've got to be a certain way to get in. You got to be a certain way to get access to God's grace, to really be a part of God's plan of redemption. And it's just not true. It's not true. It doesn't mean you should try to be broken. It doesn't mean you should celebrate brokenness. Brokenness is painful. We should try to stay away from it. We should try to heal it. But God works with it, and we shouldn't deny our own or block access to others by some holier-than-thou mentality. And God shows his blessing to Jacob as life goes on with this family. Yes, he has taught him some lessons of you reap what you sow, but he definitely blesses him. He blessed him with all these children. And then he's got his years are up, right? So he talks to Laban. He says, like, that's it. I've done my time. Like, I'm out of here. And Laban realizes, yeah, you've done your time. And while you've been here, man, I have done great. My flocks are doing amazing. And so, and I've realized by divination, like, Laban is not a true God follower the right way, but he's superstitious. Like, I've realized God's with you, some's with you, so let's keep you around. What do we got to do? Let's make a deal to keep you around. And it's like, just name your wages. And Jacob's like, man, I've like given up sleep for you. I've done everything. You know your flocks have been blessed. So, well, what should I give you? Like, don't give me anything. You just pay me. And here's, I got to take care of all these households. So you pay me, and here's what you could pay me. You could pay me the speckled sheep, the black sheep, the striped sheep, or the goats in the herd. Like, these, just, why don't you give me those, and we'll call it good. And Laban's like, that is very fair. That is a very fair offer. Let's do that. And then he goes and talks to his sons. Hey, guys, go out to the flocks, all the black ones, striped ones, speckled ones, get them out of there. Separate them out, get them out of there, get a long distance. Like, I don't want Jacob seeing those sheep or those flocks, those goats. So Jacob goes and like everything he was going to get paid is gone. So now he's got to build it up. And he's got his techniques. And so here's his technique. Every time they're in breeding season and the ewes are drinking, then he takes these trees, balsam or poplar, and he or birch or poplar. I mean, he stripes them so that they're dark and white. Like, this is pretty good. And he puts them over the sheep, and that way when the sheep are under these striped ones, of course, they're going to want to bear striped lambs. And this works. It works very well for him. In fact, I think it's kind of like church growth conference. Like, some churches, it seems like, wow, they just grow like crazy, and they got these things, and then they look back, it's like, well, what did we do? Well, this is what we did. And then they have everybody come in and listen, here's what I did. Like, here, if you want to have a successful flock here, you gotta take these trees, you gotta put them over the thing just right this time, and this is how it's like. But that's not what's going on. Like, that's what Jacob think is doing it, but that's not what's doing it. And we find out later what is doing it. So he's blessed, and he does get striped and spotted and black. He gets like huge flocks, and his flocks grow to where he's able to hire people or buy servants, and he's got camels. He's just like loaded. And Laban's sons are noticing, like, this guy's loaded. He's taking everything from dad. And they're starting to get jealous. And then Laban's not talking nice to him anymore. And so he's like, man, we better get out of here. And he gets ready to go. He has a conversation with Rachel saying, we're going to have to leave your dad because he's not talking well. Like, things are not going to go well. And he says, I had this dream. It was during the breeding season. God came to me and he said, in this dream, that whenever the females, like whenever they're watering, I got the rams that are striped or speckled or black to breed with them. And I've been watching over you because I've seen what Laban's done. So it's like Jacob thinks it's his magic tricks that are doing it. But God says, no, I'm blessing you. I'm blessing you by making sure the right rams breed with the right ewes to give you the right outcome. And sometimes we think, like something we're doing, but it's God's blessing on us. We can't earn it. We can't manufacture it. But we need it and we want to seek it. And how do you seek God's blessing? You don't necessarily do it in church, right? It's important for people to be here, so I don't want to discourage you from coming to church, but the way things work out in this story is not in a building. You see this story working out with employers and employees, like the people not being fair to others in the workplace. You see it working out in families and the brokenness in families, and that's where we got to live this stuff out. And God's got to bless us in those places. That's real life. So Jacob talks to both wives at some point, and they're like, yeah, why not leave? Our dad doesn't love us. Like, he sold us, and he's losing everything. And so Laban he reaps what he sows. And his daughters leave with his grandkids, and they don't even say goodbye. They take off, and they get 3 days distance, and then Laban finds out they're gone. And so he rallies everybody. He's like, let's go get them. And he chases after them. They catch him 7 days into it. They catch up. And the night before he's about to confront Jacob, and I'm sure his intention is not good towards Jacob. Like, if he's going to leave him alive, I don't think he's going to leave him with anything. I think he's going to send him on his way alone and take back all this stuff. But God meets Laban in a dream and tells him, hey, don't say a thing to that kid. Don't say anything good or bad, as if Laban can say anything good. Like, the good words Laban says are bad, just twisted. But Laban doesn't listen exactly to the dream, but he does refrain from hurting Jacob. And so they meet, and he accuses him, like, what are you doing? You're stealing my daughters. You're stealing my grandkids. You never said goodbye. Everything that you have is mine. And then Jacob says, what do you mean? You changed my wages 10 times over these 20 years. You've tried to rip me off every which way, but loose, and now I'm finally getting away. And God's watched over me. God's blessed me in spite of you. So these guys are not happy with each other. And Laban's like, yeah, I have the power to do you harm, but God told me don't say anything to him, good or bad. And so that's where we find ourselves in the time where this necklace is made. And so they say, like, we got to make a deal. So they build this heap of stones. This heap of stones is the witness. And between each of them, they say, like, hey, let's just agree to leave each other alone. Let's agree to never see each other again. And let's have God watch over you, and then God watch over me to kind of keep things square. And they have a meal, and in this meal, they're able to make enough peace that Laban goes and kisses his daughters and kisses his grandkids, and he leaves, and they never see each other again. And this heap of stones is the witness. We've got another necklace people wear sometimes that they don't always realize the context of it. But the cross is like that heap of stones. It's a memorial. It's something to remember, and it's to remember a covenant made because of brokenness, because of deep brokenness. But unlike the one between Laban and Jacob, where, the wronged party is chasing down and the other one feels wronged, like, one party in this covenant is innocent and one party is very broken. And the innocent party, God, he pursues the broken party, and he reaches out to the broken party, and he offers his son as the sacrifice for the broken party. And that's the meal that Jesus celebrates with his disciples, that, hey, I'm broken so that you can be made whole. I'm broken so that you can come back together. And Paul realizes that he writes to a church that's very divided, Jews, non-Jews, and they're going at each other's throats, which we still have that going on today. And he says, hey, the cross is to bring people back together. And so in our brokenness, God has provided something for us, and we want to celebrate that today, to remember that, hey, he doesn't want us to stay broken. He wants to bring us together.